Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Friday, March 20th edition of the MMAOB Daily Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Adam Martin, and I'll be taking you guys through the latest in the world of mixed martial arts, of which there isn't a ton yet again because this coronavirus pandemic is still ravaging the world and still ravaging the sports world, especially the MMA world. Just, it's crazy. It's a crazy time, as you guys know. A lot of people off work right now, just kind of sitting around wondering what to do. The good thing is, we got this podcast right now, so I'll be talking a little bit about MMA, whatever is going on. And the other good news is we have an event today, Cage Warriors 113. Yay! So we get to actually watch some MMA, which is sweet because most fans of most pro sports don't get to watch any events right now. We at least get to watch Cage Warriors. So that is pretty cool. Definitely some controversy of them still doing the event, but at the end of the day, we're all MMA fans, and these fighters, they do know the risks. I'm not sure if they know just how risky it is for these events to be pulled off still, but at the same time, these guys want to perform, they want to get paid. Who am I to stop them, right? I'm not saying I agree with the event going on. It probably is not the right idea, but it is going on. So yes, I will be trying to watch at least some of this card today. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well. Cage Warriors is a good promotion. They've been around for a long time, put on some good fights. And this card, it has been ravaged with visa issues and guys pulling out of the fights, not for their own reasons, but just due to a lot of red tape going on. But there are definitely some good fights on this card for sure. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. I want to talk about some other news first. Let's start with Dana White here. Dana White has fired back at his critics in a couple of different interviews. He talked to CNN yesterday. He also talked to, I think it was like an Instagram live chat, and he just went off on the critics. Basically, Dana White's point was that there's a lot of nerds in the MMA media, and they don't understand what he's doing, and they just want to complain for the sake of it. He also said in the CNN interview that he has not fired one single employee, has not laid anyone off due to the coronavirus pandemic, which definitely is true. They have not laid any employees off, but at the same time, they did cut 13 guys the other day, and actually 14 because I'll talk about someone else in a second here. And they have not made any statement about pay, which definitely bothers me. Bellator came out last week and they paid their fighters for that card, 241, and they don't have a card next month. So Bellator's in a different spot because the UFC has all these cards coming up or whatever. But yeah, it's still kind of weird that they have not made some sort of statement about pay, like, hey, we're going to pay these guys at fights. Basically Dana's saying we'll get guys their fights when it's time to, but he's assuming this thing's going to end soon. Like, I don't think Dana realizes how like severe this is. Like, this could go on for a few months, guys. We could be a few months without any sports. Like, it's not even about sports anymore. Like, people are dropping like flies around the world. Like, it's pretty scary stuff. At first I was not too concerned about this, I'm not going to lie, but the last couple of days I'm starting to feel a lot more worried about just how drastic this is going to change the world, and especially the population. Like, it's pretty scary stuff. I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I can't help but read what I see, the reports on social media and all over the internet, just about the amount of people there are dying around the world. So it is really scary stuff. I obviously want the UFC to come back soon, but I don't know if Dana White's being realistic. Like, he still wants the Tony Ferguson and Khabib fight to happen April 18th. That's not happening. I'm sorry, guys. It's not happening. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but, we all want to be optimistic for sure, and we all want to see that fight. I can't see any way that fight happens in 28 days from now. Like, how? How could that happen? You think everything's going to change in 28 days? I don't think so. I mean, even if they found somewhere in like Dubai to do it, like, how can Tony and Khabib get out of California to go there? I don't think that's going to happen. I just feel like Dana is being way too optimistic about the situation. Like, he's kind of got to realize that, these MMA media nerds, as he calls them, they're just being realistic, and he's being unrealistic. Dana, listen, he is the greatest MMA promoter ever. He is really good at his job, no doubt about it. Even if you disagree with how he handles certain situations like this, you have to admit the guy knows how to run an MMA promotion. He knows how to make money. But at the same time, he's being really unrealistic about his expectations for the next few months. But yeah, the one thing that does bother me is the fighter pay thing. Like, they really should have came up with a statement saying, we're going to pay anyone on the next 3, I guess, or 4 shows, including Brooklyn. So it'd be the London card, the cards in Portland and Ohio, and then the Brooklyn card. I would have said, I was hoping they would have said we're going to pay these guys their show money, and we'll get them a fight as soon as possible. He's just saying we're going to get them a fight. We'll get their 3 fights in this year. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, if this coronavirus thing wipes out like 3 months of the calendar, how is that going to be possible? They're going to put 2 shows every night? Like, I don't know. It's a little unrealistic. I will say this as well. Aaron Bronsteiner, my good friend, TSN, he did an interview with Dana the other day, and he did not ask about the fighter pay question. And I personally messaged Aaron and asked him, like, is there a reason you didn't ask? And basically just said that he was embarrassed because he forgot to ask the question. And you know what? That happens. That happens to the best of us. So I was glad to hear that, though. I was glad that, and I knew he wasn't like intentionally trying to do that, because if you watch the interview with Aaron, all of his questions were like really tough questions to Dana, and he's always like that with Dana. Him and Dana have a good rapport, which is great. And Aaron he's awesome, man. He's one of the best guys right now for sure, covering MMA. But I think that did surprise a lot of people. He didn't ask, but it wasn't malicious. He just literally forgot, and it happens. We've all forgot to ask a certain question. So just wanted to throw it out there, because I know a lot of people were kind of going harsh on Aaron. He wasn't feeling too good about it, but it happens. It really does. I've definitely interviewed people where I forgot to ask a certain question, and it sucks. But the other questions he asked, I think, were pretty tough, including the question where he was asking Dana about, why were you guys going to the Indian reservation if all the commissioners were okay with this? Because that's what Dana was saying. He's like, all the commissioners are okay with it. He really didn't have an answer. So, Aaron has no problem saying that. I just saw some people criticizing him, and I can understand why, because he did miss that question, but it was just literally a miss. It wasn't malicious by any means. So just got to back my boy up in there, and Aaron, because he's been one of my best friends in this business for almost 10 years now. All right, let's get to some other news here. Diego Sanchez, he has accepted Demian Maia's call out, so he does like this fight. I think it's a pretty good fight. Demian Maia called out either Diego Sanchez or Dalton Cerrone, both solid fights, both fights that make a lot of sense. All 3 guys are kind of on the tail end of their careers. Dalton Cerrone coming off, I think, 3 straight knockout losses now. Diego Sanchez coming off that win over Michel Pereira, but come on, let's be honest here. He was getting his butt kicked in that fight, and Maia obviously coming off the loss to Gilbert Burns. So either of those guys, all 3 of them kind of mixed together, make sense. They're fights that haven't happened before. But I do like the Sanchez-Maia fight. It'd be a fun grappling match. I obviously favor Maia, the bigger guy, the stronger guy, the more experienced grappler. But I think Diego, he's very hard to submit. I don't think he's ever been submitted before. He's extremely hard to submit. It'd be very interesting to see if Maia could be the first guy to ever submit Diego Sanchez. I'm just going to double check that. I want to make sure that I'm saying that right. I'm pretty sure he's never been submitted. He has been finished by strikes a few times. And yes, he has never been submitted. Diego Sanchez has had 42 fights, no submission losses. He has been finished by strikes 4 times. Of course, the last time being against Matt Brown in 2017 with that nasty elbow. So it'd be an interesting fight. I personally think it's a fun matchup, and I'd like for the UFC to book it. Of course, they can't really book anything anytime soon, but once they do, that maybe that international fight week card, Demian Maia versus Diego Sanchez, retirement fight for both guys, quite honestly, probably makes a lot of sense. Derrick Lewis, he's calling for a rematch with Francis Ngannou. We all remember their first fight, UFC 226. It was a terrible fight. Derrick Lewis won a unanimous decision in that fight. It was an awful fight. Neither guy threw any strikes early. It was just a weird fight. The only good thing about that was I actually had Derrick Lewis, and I think he was like plus 350 or something. He was a huge underdog. Kind of everyone was like not giving him a chance there, and he was able to somehow outstrike Ngannou, who kind of was gun-shy in that fight. And since then, Ngannou's obviously been on a roll. He's been knocking everyone out, knocked out JDS, knocked out Kane, knocked out Blades. He's looked great. Obviously, the fight with Rosenstruck was canceled. That was supposed to happen next weekend, which sucks. That was going to be such a good fight. Derrick Lewis coming off back-to-back wins in his last 2 fights over Blagoy Ivanov, and in his last fight, Ilir Latifi. So he's looked pretty good lately too. Not finishing guys like he used to, but still getting the wins. You'd have to favor Ngannou yet again in this fight, but at the same time, Lewis did win the first one, so it'd be interesting. A lot of fans are not happy about this though, because the first fight was so bad. But I think the rematch would be a lot different. Derek says it's going to be a lot more entertaining, and I think it would be too. But I think Ngannou is probably going to fight Rosenstruck next, and then probably gets a title shot, I would guess, the winner of that fight, if Ngannou wins especially. But if he loses, Lewis fight would make a lot of sense too. So we'll see what happens, guys. But I would say, if I'm a betting man, and I am, I would say within the next couple of years, we will see this rematch, even if you don't want to see it, because there's not a lot of options in the top end of the heavyweight division. A lot of guys are going to fight each other a couple times, and I think this is one fight we probably will see run back, even though the first fight sucked, basically. Gegard Mousasi, my boy James Lynch at the Score interviewed him, and he wants to fight Israel Adesanya. He thinks it's a very interesting style matchup. Now, it's not going to happen, obviously, because he's with Bellator under a long-term contract. He just signed a long-term deal. He's supposed to fight Douglas Lima next month, or 2 months from now, I should say, in May 9th in San Jose for the vacant middleweight belt. Who knows if that's going to happen at this point? We really have no idea. It's going to be a great fight, though. But, hypothetically, Mousasi versus Adesanya sounds great to me. I was a little upset when Mousasi left the UFC a few years ago. I thought the UFC should have done a much better job of paying him what he was worth to keep him around, because he really is one of the, probably the top 10 middleweights in the world, I would say. Arguably top 5, but at least the top 10 for sure. And I think that this fight with Adesanya would be really interesting, because Mousasi's he's just very well rounded. He's very technical, and he's very good with his distance too, distance control, which obviously is something that Adesanya excels at. So Mousasi versus Adesanya would have been a great fight. Not going to happen, but Mousasi versus Lima, thankfully, is happening May 9th. Cross our fingers. I mean, that fight could be scrapped as well just due to this, but yeah, if that fight does happen, it's going to be a really interesting fight. But hypothetically, man, Mousasi Adesanya would be a really fun one, but likely not going to happen anytime soon. I said earlier that one more fighter was released. So yesterday, the UFC, they didn't make an announcement, but Sherdog basically got a list of 13 guys that they released, guys and girls, I should say. And all 13 of them are gone, and a few of them have confirmed it. But one other guy has also been released. Ismail Naurdiev, a young welterweight prospect, he's been released from the UFC. He actually announced it himself. And basically, he says that he had an option of re-signing, but he chose to go back to the regional scene and work on his game. And you know what? It's not a terrible idea, because honestly, he hasn't been too impressive in the UFC. He's 2-2, beat Pereira, beat Haderzada, lost to Red Counter and Brady. But at the same time, the goal as a fighter is to make it to the UFC. So something's weird about this to me. Were they offering 10-10? I could see why he would say no to that. But if they were saying hey, you can get 20-20 or something, I don't know why he would have not taken it. The only thing I can think of is they one of these European promotions in Russia or something. Did they offer him a huge contract that he couldn't turn down? That's possibly what it was, and the UFC didn't want to match it, because otherwise it's kind of weird that a 23-year-old prospect left the UFC with a 2-2 record. It's not like it's that bad. So kind of strange, but yeah, I mean, I could definitely see why he'd want to work on his game. His last fight with Brady was not too impressive. His takedown defense is an issue, but still, I mean, 19-4 record. He's got 23 fights at age 23. I think that's enough experience. So it's kind of weird, but yeah, he's the latest guy who's been released. And quite frankly, I expect some more guys to be released very soon, because they need to make room for the new Contender Series guys. But of course, the Contender Series is something else that is also up in the air due to the coronavirus outbreak. The only thing about that is it is taking place at the Apex. So if Nevada kind of limits, maybe if they say you can only have 10 or 20 people inside a building, the UFC could be able to pull it off, but right now that's not looking too likely anytime soon. All right, so I want to talk about Cage Warriors, because Cage Warriors does take place today, and it's a decent card, I guess. I mean, it's been kind of ravaged together, and there's some fights here that are interesting. I do like this fight. Okay, let's just go through it here. It's over at bestfightodds.com. That's where I'm pulling these odds from. Bartosz Fabinski against Darren Stewart. Interesting fights for sure. Bartosz Fabinski is actually a pretty underrated fighter, I think. A lot of people, he's kind of got a funny name, right? So people just kind of look at him and they're like, this guy's not that great. But honestly, he's not a bad fighter. I mean, he's 3-1 in the UFC. Beat Mccullen, beat Urbina, beat Mech, which was a good win for him, and then lost to Pereira his last fight, which was pretty quick too, and pretty surprising the way he lost. But overall, he's actually a decent fighter. He's got good wrestling. He's got decent ability to finish the fight with ground and pound, so he's not bad. And he takes on Darren Stewart here. The problem is he's moving up from welterweight to middleweight, which scares me. He has fought middleweight in the past, but moving back up against a guy like Darren Stewart, who's a huge middleweight, this is kind of scary. Darren Stewart's an underrated fighter too. I mean, he's kind of a guy that started off really weak in the UFC. He had no contest against Barroso, and then he had 3 straight losses. He lost to rematch Barroso, lost to Robertson and Marquez by submission. Most guys get cut after 4 fights with no wins, but the UFC kept him around since then. He's looked great. He's won 4 of his last 5. He beat Deron Wynn. He beat Devon Lewis, Charles Bird, and Eric Spicely. And the one loss was a split decision to Serbazian, who's obviously one of the best prospects right now at middleweight. And it was a super close fight. So this guy's super impressive to me, and he's very underrated. If this is a welterweight fight, definitely would give Fabinski a better chance, but at middleweight, you got to favor Darren Stewart, and the odds have him at minus 230. I think he probably grinds out a decision. Fabinski's pretty tough to finish, but I would not surprise me if Darren Stewart is able to finish him either by stoppage or maybe a ground and pound kind of thing or something. But you got to favor Darren Stewart in this fight in the main event of Cage Warriors 113, and maybe it's not a title fight for a Cage Warriors belt, but I think these two guys are probably most recognizable fighters on the card. So I think, considering they are UFC fighters, this is actually a good idea for Cage Warriors to have them in the main event. Just looking at some other fights on the card here, I'm just going to pull up the Tapology page here for Cage Warriors 113. We got Mason Jones against Joe Mccullen. This is a lightweight title fight. Excuse me. Mason Jones right now minus 535. Joe Mccullen plus 420. So Mason Jones undefeated. He's a really good prospect. Obviously, they call him the Dragon. The young Welsh fighter, 24 years old, and no hugely notable wins by any means, but he's definitely looked good in Cage Warriors, and he deserves a chance to fight for the vacant. He's what's his record here? 6-2-1, so kind of an uneven record. SBG guy though, so definitely trains with some good fighters. His best win, I guess, would be Peter Quelly, who's a Bellator now, so that's a decent win. He's 2-0-1 in his last 3, so he's looked okay. But Mason Jones, really good prospect. No surprise here to see him as a big favorite. Looking down the card here, Paddy Pimblett versus Declan Dalton. Paddy Pimblett, for a long time, was like one of these hyped up guys from Ireland, or not Ireland, excuse me, like the UK, I should say. He's an English fighter. But for whatever reason, he just kind of never has panned out to be the kind of guy that a lot of people thought he would be. He's got a 14-3 record, so it's solid, but he's lost 2 of his last 3 fights. He lost to Nad Narimani, he lost to Soren Back, and those guys they're solid fighters for sure, but those are fights that he could have won, and he probably would have got signed to the UFC or Bellator had he won, and he didn't win those fights. His best win would probably be Julian Erosa, former UFC fighter, or maybe Ashley Grimshaw, who's Bellator right now. But this guy was very hyped up for a long time. He's been on Ariel's show a bunch of times, so a lot of people know who he is. But he hasn't won a fight in 2 years, so that definitely is a little bit worrisome. Takes on Dalton here. He's the Irish guy in this fight, and Dalton, he's on a 4-fight win streak, which is pretty nice. But again, low-ranked competition, guys with sub-500 records for the most part. He actually has fought decent level competition though. He's fought guys like Jonathan Brookins and Peter Quelly, Zach Zane, so some UFC guys and Bellator guys there, but has not really fared well to him. You got to go with Paddy Pimblett in this fight. Don't love the odds here at minus 450. Do you really want to lay that kind of juice on this guy? I don't think so, but at the same time, he probably does win this fight. Let's keep going down here at best fight odds. David Bear versus Nathan Jones. I think this fight was added pretty late to the card, if I'm not mistaken. Nathan Jones, 13-9 record. This guy's got one of the better nicknames, Mr. Bag and Tag. I love that nickname. Really good one. He's actually won 2 straight fights, which is nice. Guy who's been around for a long time. 8 years now he's been a pro, so he's been around, pretty familiar with who he is. Like I said, I think he's got a great nickname there. But he's another guy where he steps up in competition and loses, like when he fought Ross Houston, for instance, lost that fight. David Bear here, he is 8-1, French fighter, and David Bear is coming off a win after bouncing back from his first career loss. The odds have Bear as the favorite here. He does have a better record, but I think Jones has actually fought better competition, so the odds look a little bit too high for me for Bear personally, but maybe some people are going to bet on him. Just going down the card here, we got this fight. Do all the fights have odds this year? Perry and Goodwin. That fight does not have odds. No, it does have odds. Okay, they don't have his middle name here. Okay, so Perry Goodwin against Steve Aimable. Let's take a look at these guys here. The odds have this one at Aimable minus 150, Goodwin plus 130. Aimable 14-6. He is an English fighter. He's coming off a loss to Mads Burnell. Mads Burnell is a really good fighter who should be in the UFC still. He was released some reason. I don't know why, but he's really good, and he could easily be back in the UFC soon. And overall, this guy is another fighter that has decent amount of experience, but he's fought kind of low-level competition. And Goodwin here, 9-6 record. He is he's an English fighter too. He's coming off a win, but he's lost actually 3 of his last 5 fights. And I don't know. I guess I lean towards Aimable a little bit, but who knows really with that one. And let's see what else here. Honestly, there's a lot of guys that let's be honest here, are not really household names, guys with like minimal records and stuff like that. If you guys are in a bet in these fights, I definitely would take a look and maybe try to watch some tape before the card starts in a few hours. But I would probably try to stick to maybe the top couple fights here, just because they are a little bit more better in quantities. I do like Darren Stewart to win that fight, man. I think that, if this was a UFC fight, I'd be picking him for sure, and it basically is. The size difference, obviously, the fact that both guys have had kind of a rough week definitely makes things a little weird. But I would definitely assume he wins. Just maybe doing like a parlay. Let's see here, Stewart and I don't know Jones -140. You add Pimblett +108. I mean, that's a parlay you could possibly do. Of course, betting 3 fighters at once is always a little bit risky. But I know a lot of people like to bet on parlays, and that's a parlay that you could definitely consider. So definitely take a look at the rest of the card here, and if there's a bet you want to make, why not? I mean, there's not much else going on right now, so if that's your jam, why not do it? All right, guys, that's gonna be it for today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Like I said, next week's going to 2 shows a week, which definitely sucks, but hopefully it's temporary. So I'll probably do Monday and Friday. In the meantime, you guys can follow me on Twitter at MMAdamMartin, and this podcast is available at MMAOddsbreaker.com. I'm also available at BJPen.com and MMARings.net. Guys, once again, thanks for tuning in. It's been a crazy week. Hopefully next week turn things around a little bit. We'll see. I'll be back Monday, though, for sure. Bye, guys. Have a good one.